Good afternoon. Welcome to this Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. I am Councillor Mary McLaren and I am chairing the meeting today. First of all, committee and guests, I'm going to ask you to stand and we're going to have 2 minutes silence. Today is Armistice Day and I would like us to respect all that has been happened today and yesterday. So can I ask you to stand for 2 minutes silence? Thank you. Thank you. You may be seated. May I first remind you of some of the domestic arrangements? If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones and laptops are on silent. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the mod.gov app. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. If you are intending to do so, please inform the committee clerk. If you hear the fire alarm, leave the building immediately via fire exit and make your way to the assembly point, which is Ipswich Town Football Ground. Follow the signs directing you to the fire exit at each end of the floor. Do not enter the atrium, which is the ground floor area and walkways. If you are in the atrium at the time of the alarm, follow the signs to the nearest fire exit. Use the stairs, not the lifts. Do not re-enter the building until told it is safe to do so. So we'll start the agenda properly. So this afternoon we have the following people in attendance for this meeting. We have got Councillor Helen Davis, Cabinet Member for Climate Change, Nature Recovery and Biodiversity. Officers are attending is Mark Ems, Director for Operations and Climate Change, Sarah Wilding, Climate Change Manager, and Sharon Bayliss, Service Improvement Advisor in brackets Operations. We're also being ably supported by Alicia Norman, Lead Officer for Overview and Scrutiny. Can I move to the agenda, please? Item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies this afternoon, but Councillor Grandin will be joining us a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary, other registrable or non-registrable interests by members. Are there any to declare? No? To receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Item 4, questions by the public.
None received.
And item 5, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair. Thank you.
So we now move to item 6, which is BOS/24/01, Greenhouse Gas and Carbon Reduction Management Plan, CRMP, update. I would like to invite the Cabinet Member for Climate Change, Nature Recovery and Biodiversity to introduce the report to the committee. Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to bring this report to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee today, not least because I think it's a good report. Is that better? Sorry, it's also me. I can't speak as well as I normally do. Yeah, so just rolling back, I'm pleased to bring this report to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. They've worked pretty hard on this greenhouse report, but we are also very happy to have a fresh set of eyes on the report, as you may spot something that we've missed, or you may have suggestions that we can incorporate going forward. I think, as everyone knows, we declared a climate emergency in 2018-19 and committed to net zero by 2030, which is a pretty ambitious target. A couple of numbers. 23-24, the CO2 emissions have reduced by 13% compared with 22-23. That's for both councils. The emissions were 3,388 tonnes of carbon dioxide, which is actually 4.7% above our projected target of 3,236 for reasons that we can elaborate on later. I should point out that last year's report covered both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk together, but this year's report covers Babergh only. So next year's report you will start to see more detailed trending, which I'm sure will be useful. In terms of highlights of the report, the leisure centres are the biggest emitters at 54%. However, the emissions have reduced by 11% from 22-23, so not bad. Emissions should be further reduced if the leisure centres integrate and actively use half-hourly data, solar energy data and battery storage. This will result in further improvements to the timing of their processes and building management. The Sport England swimming pool funding secured earlier this year for smart meters and pool covers will be completed by 2025 and should further reduce emissions. However, this won't be reported on until the 25-26 greenhouse gas report. There's actually been an increase of 43% in emissions by our social housing units, 34% of gas and 67% in electricity. This is partly due to issues with reporting last year, i.e. data collection. It's now improved, so stuff comes to the surface, and to more robust energy management this year. There's much more work to do here. However, improved efficiency and close monitoring, together with better partnership working, will ensure that emissions will be reduced in the future. Section 4.9 of the report does refer to the fact that we, as a council, need to make long-term decisions on the lifespan of all our assets. So that's Endeavour House, as well as some of the things that CIFCO have, for example, and also the cost effectiveness of carbon reduction measures. Initially, we're doing the big wins, but as time goes on, it will be harder to get those wins. So the trajectory or the speed of achieving net zero will slow as we progress further. Emissions from our waste fleet continues to reduce, with a reduction of 27% since last year. Since reporting in 2018-19, emissions have reduced by 659.7 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So in summary, reaching net zero by 2030 is becoming more challenging, and without significant investment, this will not be achieved. Government grants often need to be match funded, and lack officer resource to deliver to often very tight timescales is another obstacle to overcome. So as a general comment, I would say basically no funding, no net zero. That's our major issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Can I just say to I just want to, at this point, to thank the team for all their hard work in putting that report together. Everything takes a long time, doesn't it, to get all the details, so thank you very much. So I now move to members who can now ask questions. Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to also reiterate the Chair's comments and thank you for the report. It's good to see lots of actions underway. I've got lots of questions. I'll start off. With our budget situation, obviously costs are a concern, but there's no actual breakdown of potential costs or savings on any of the actions. I mean, is that going to be? I mean, is there L1 and H, which I assume means low and high costs, but no actual. For example, like the potential carports, solar carports at Hadley and Stradbroke. I mean, do we know yet how much things are going to cost? The actions are going to cost us.
I think I'll pass that question over to the team to answer in more detail.
So the actions moving forward and how much further actions will cost. That is something that it's really difficult to quantify. It's something that we do need to do, though. You're right.
I think if I could just add to that, in terms of this report, we thought it was a useful time to bring this forward, as it was the time of year where we were bringing the greenhouse gas emissions report forward anyway, and we were aware that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, through their work programme, had asked to have a look at climate change. What we haven't been able to do in the time frame of bringing this report forward is to be able to get finance resource diverted to carry out a cost assessment exercise on what the cost has been to date of climate change, and we understand that the committee may be interested in that. But the resource has been deployed elsewhere, getting the budgets together. Obviously, if that's something else you want to come back or ask further questions around, then that's something we can take away the questions or try and do. But this report isn't trying to be a financial assessment of climate change and what it's cost. It's really using this opportunity to bring forward the greenhouse gas emissions report. We welcome your view on that, and the carbon reduction management plan, because they are the two sort of significant bodies of evidence that we have in this area, I think.
Councillor Wyman.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps a slightly more strategic question, probably aimed at the Director. How do you feel the fit will be in relation to the changes that we're seeing from central government over the top-down targets we'll be getting shortly over renewable energy? So I understand there will be a paper from the Department of Communities and Local Government over how it expects the district to operate in relation to renewable energy and our targets. How does this fit with our integration with JLP Part 2 and the sites that potentially we'll be looking at for development over the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and the BNG issues, so i.e. on-site biodiversity, and how we can influence that within the council itself to get larger sites and a better carbon offset?
Well, in terms of the biodiversity bit, was the last part of that question. Obviously, there's work being carried out on the supplementary planning document around that at the moment, and I know that that's in consultation with various providers in there, and that feeds into part of the Joint Local Plan Part 2 as well. We are mandated to ask for 10% biodiversity net gain. I think we've gone further than that aspirationally to try and aspire for developers to deliver more than that. We've made good progress on the biodiversity side in terms of tree planting, hedgerow planting, what we're doing, but of course that takes a long while to mature before it gets into a position where it is soaking up carbon and sinking in carbon there as well. In terms of the rest of the joint local plan, I think I'll probably have to take that away and speak more to planning colleagues about how they think legislation is going to be influencing around there, and the changes are influencing. Obviously, there's a lot of change going on in the district around solar, and a lot of contentious points that are coming in, and the national infrastructure and pylons and everything. So there's a lot that's happening, and I think in some respects we've got to wait and see how things start to emerge with the new government that's in place as well, and the view they take around some of that. We as a climate team, I suppose, in terms of what we're doing, we have relatively small influence over that. As a council within planning and the JLP, then they have some more influence in terms of policy, and that those elements come through the committee process to be agreed as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a very interesting paper, as usual. Long on ambition, very short on facts. We are asked to review the contents, easy. Review the appendices, easy. Make comments and recommendations that they would like the portfolio holder to consider. And we should also, we note and support the progress that's been made and the plans in place to meet the challenge of 2030. I don't know that I can go wholeheartedly into this. What I find interesting in this, when we go under financial implications, paragraph 6, we're told the built estate for decarbonise is going to cost £11 million, more or less, for both councils, okay, and will reduce overall emissions by 45%. We're not told about what else there is apart from the built estate. Okay, I also note that we have a reserve of £139,000, which suggests that there's an awful lot of money that needs to be spent between now and 2030, which then brings us to the question of, is it worth it? So, one of the UKIP members in Suffolk once compared to our climate needs as the equivalent of a Chihuahua against a Great Dane. And the question really is, how much difference do we make to the United Kingdom? And how much does the United Kingdom make to the world? Because I keep seeing figures of less than 1% compared to the United States, India and China. And the question really is, why are we doing all this when we're not going to make 1% difference? And plus, you know, why are we spending this sort of money for 1% difference? That's my question.
Yeah, it's a valid challenge and a valid question. Obviously, I explained earlier in terms of the paper having the depth of financial information. I'm sure that's probably this isn't the particular paper that would necessarily satisfy council in terms of around that financial information. I think, for me personally, one of the reasons why we do this is it's about the future. It's about playing our part. It's trying to act in the right way to provide some sort of behaviours that help to moderate what is going around us in terms of the district, in terms of the choices residents make, the choices businesses make, the choices different organisations make going forward. I think we all are very concerned and very worried that whether those changes will be enough to make significant difference, but that's not a justifiable reason not to try and make those changes and to strive to make those changes and to lead by example in doing that, really, to be honest. And I would say that's how I would answer that question, really.
Councillor Riley, did you want to follow that up? Yeah, please.
Well, I think we would be better off spending our time and our money and our resources and everything else lobbying India and China to reduce their emissions rather than just focus on ours. Ditto for the United States. You know, I mean, I'm quite horrified that this, I mean, I hate to downgrade it and say it's a vanity project, but compared to the great wider world, it is a vanity project. You know, we shouldn't be here. You know, we should be focusing on other things. By all means, we make life easier and make our district better and more attractive to our residents. Hence, one of the reasons why we're spending so much money on the trash collections and disposals. I find myself unable...
Councillor Riley, have you got a question? You've got lots of time to debate afterwards.
I'm sorry.
Have you got another question?
No.
Okay, well, we look forward to the debate then. Councillor G, you had another question, didn't you?
You've got a couple of questions on these specific actions. There's one on page 14, 3.4, where we're saying we are going to target BREEAM standards very good for new builds, but we're not going to apply that to renovation and refurbs. And I wondered why that is when BREEAM actually have standards for renovation and refurb. So why are we not? That was one. And there was another one. There was a couple. There's one on page 25, 9.8. I just wondered, we've got a member of Mid Suffolk who's going to be on the Climate Leadership Academy. I just wondered why one member from Babergh has been included within that. And on behavioural change, page 29, 6.2, we're talking about a database for keeping information on. I wondered why that is included on the climate change action plan. What benefits has a database got for?
Thank you, Chair. If I just respond, I missed out the middle one. So I had 3.4 and then the behaviour change one. What was the other one?
It's culture and governance on page 25, 9.8. Hold on, please. Let me get to it. So Councillor Davis from Mid Suffolk is going to be on the Climate Leadership Academy. I just wondered why that's not been, why Babergh have not been included on that as well.
Can I do them in reverse order?
Yeah,
okay.
Whatever way, yeah.
So if I do the behaviour change one, when I was tasked with doing the refresh of the carbon reduction management plan, one of the things that I was quite concerned with was the fact that it was very inward facing, just looking at us as a council rather than looking at our residents and our communities as well. So that's why there's this second strand. So you'll see that there's council and community. Mm-hmm. So it was felt very much when we, as a task and finish group, that we would also focus on trying to affect that change in our communities, that climate change and taking action against climate change isn't just the council's responsibility, that it's everybody's responsibility.
Yeah, but where does the, I mean, what is the, where does the, is that point is about us develop, or someone developing the database, and what's that? What's the benefit of that? I mean, it may just be me being simplistic, but...
9.8.
Yeah, sorry, I think, was that the, that's the point about the green clauses being inserted in to the database there?
Sorry?
Was that one 6.2?
6.2 on page 29, yeah. It is to produce a database of funding and assistance to support local communities. But, I mean, I know that's obviously, it's going to be a good thing to do, but is that relevant to a climate change action plan?
I'd have to defer there to our communities team, because that action is actually, they're responsible for that one.
Okay.
So this plan is actually an amalgamation of actions from different service areas. So they already have a database that they've been collating for funding, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to effect that change within our communities is something that they feel will have an effect.
Right, okay.
But I would have to defer to them for that one.
No problem.
And then the other one was 6.2, was it? No, that was 9.8. I think 3.4. 3.4. Shall I respond to 3.4 next?
Yeah,
You want
whatever
me
way,
to?
yeah.
Okay, let me just go back to that one. That's the draft one. Yeah, I'm sure.
Sorry, so this one, yeah, this one was around the BREEAM design standards and why those standards weren't applicable to renovation refurb projects. We'd have to find that out and speak to our assets team about that have, like Sarah had said, had brought that in from their particular service. But obviously, achieving those standards in those projects is going to be more challenging when they're refurbishing and renovating a project, as opposed to starting a project from the off and starting a project from the start. Where BREEAM standards can be specified, but obviously there's an alternative standard. You said that
Yeah, there is a BREEAM standard specific for refurb and redo, they call it, yeah.
I'll be surprised if that's not something where we're in control of the projects, which I'm sure we're adopting that and taking on board, but the wording doesn't seem to reflect that, so we'd have to have a look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, that must be a typo, because it's not Mid-Suffolk only. It's Babergh and Mid-Suffolk for the UK 100 membership.
Yeah.
So I'll take that away so that we
so
can amend that.
There isn't any mention of a Babergh
yeah.
member? No?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
It says 3.4 is the council, not community.
Councillor Jamieson, have we sorted your questions out? Yeah, okay. Right. Can I just acknowledge that Councillor Grandon has joined the meeting? Welcome, Councillor. We're right in the middle of the questions, actually. Yeah, we did. Thank you. So we're in the middle of the questions.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question on simplified recycling, and I suspect it's a Scope 3 carbon issue, but what have we factored into our plans over the next 3, 4, 5 years, what the impact of simplified recycling will be, and how that will, how we can build that into our sort of carbon reduction management process, i.e., we're moving away from incineration to presumably anaerobic digestion. I accept it's potentially a Scope 3 kind of subject, but it's something which probably would have a massive impact on what our overall sort of carbon reduction management aspirations might be.
And unfortunately, from this report point of view, then that is actually out of scope because it's the county council's emissions, but councillor's absolutely right in pointing out that we have a big bearing on the amount of waste that is collected or recycled and how we influence the diversion to food waste and anaerobic digestion, which will directly reduce down the residual waste and the amount of waste that is then being converted from energy to waste and incinerated and turned into carbon. And I guess therein lies one of the challenges in the process, that something we're responsible for is going to reflect in somebody else's figures from that point of view. But we would certainly be, from the point of that change coming in, looking to at least reflect in the text of this report the level of carbon emission saving that has occurred because of that, and has been responsible. And we're working closely with our colleagues in the disposal authority to try and minimise that as much as possible.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick follow-up question. On hydrogen, Mark, did we look at, as opposed to HVO and all these other things, did we actually look at hydrogen as far as vehicles were concerned, and or any other processes that we undertake within the district?
The cost of hydrogen from a waste vehicle point of view at the moment is very expensive, the vehicles, but also there's a challenge about transporting and storing hydrogen and the actual availability of hydrogen as well. So that hydrogen as a vehicle choice hasn't been a viable option for us. Electric as a vehicle choice is a potential viable option for us. We're bringing a paper through in January. It's might not be an option for Babergh because it requires quite a bit of upfront capital from a food waste collection vehicle point of view. It's potential though that it may be recoverable over the lifetime of the vehicle operation. I think the other challenge is in connection to our depot and having the infrastructure for electric, and it's certainly something that we're planning in for the new depot proposal that's going to get brought forward, but I think it would be doubtful that we'd want to invest in the existing depot and then have to write that investment off for the electric charging infrastructure over a short period of 2 or 3 years. It probably wouldn't be viable from that point of view. Most of the carbon in waste collection and disposal operations is released through the disposal of the waste, and compared to the collection of the waste, the wheels on the ground, it's typically like less than 10% of the total carbon emissions. So you're absolutely right to point out that waste minimisation is the way to reduce the most carbon.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hendry.
Sorry. Firstly, I'd just like to say I think the council as a whole, I'd like to thank the officers because I think we have made great inroads towards reducing our carbon. I think it's fantastic. But I am a bit concerned, as Councillor Davies pointed out, that we've had all the easy wins. And it's great. I love the fact that the culture is changing throughout the entire council. You can see that happening in every department, and everyone is thinking about how they can improve it. But my question really is about the leisure centres. That, if you look at the lovely pie chart, it's 54% of our CO2 is leisure centre use. Now, could you tell me whether that is just the swimming pools or whether it is a bigger problem with the leisure centres as a whole?
Yeah, that will be the leisure centre as a whole, not just the swimming pool. So obviously you've got things like if they've got saunas and so on, and changing rooms, heating changing rooms.
Okay, and so following on from that, sorry, how realistic is it that we're going to what else can we do to our leisure centres? I know you said there's something coming in where we're going to be using, I didn't quite understand the technology we're going to be using to improve that, but bearing in mind this is such a high proportion of the CO2 use, what other measures can we take? And realistically, are we going to be able to hit net zero while running the leisure centres without completely changing the way that they operate?
Smart metering is what you're referring to, I think. Yeah. And it's got a reputation for, yes, making sure that we've got much more robust data and ensuring that the leisure centres are using the renewable energy when they need it. So, you know, there's no point having all of this energy if they're not, and then they can look at operationally making sure that they're using the energy when they've got the maximum amount of use. So, you know, that will hopefully make a big difference.
Yes, I think what Sarah's explaining there is some of the changes that we've put in around battery storage in connection to the solar releases the battery energy then at the particular time when it's required. So when you have excess solar, you store in the battery and then you release it at the peak period. But Councillor's absolutely right in pointing out that the leisure centres are a big emitter of carbon, a big usage of energy. You can't get away from having a gas-heated swimming pool, as the whole of the public sector is struggling with, is a large part of the emissions, and changing that is going to be very difficult. What we've highlighted in the report as well is that requires integrated action and planning with the lifetime of the leisure centre as well. So the leisure centres will have a finite life. They were built a number of years ago and they are energy efficient to a point, but it will be also about how we design the next leisure centres for the future probably as well, because how much investment do you put into a building that has a finite life ultimately as well. So it is a big challenge. There is funding out there for decarbonisation. The assets team and the housing team have worked on their assets and are developing plans around that, but it also requires some careful commitment from the council as well, because there's always an element of match funding and project funding and resource funding there. But there's no point in shying away from this is going to be the hardest end of the decarbonisation that we're facing achieving now.
Councillor Grandin.
Thank you. My sincere apologies if you've already covered this while I wasn't here. I too, like my colleagues, think it's marvellous how far we've got. And I thought this is a very good, very clear paper. But one of the things that I was concerned about as I was reading the whole thing was the sort of cost, the financial cost versus the gain in our climate change goals. And we all know that the council is in difficulties from a financial point of view. So I'm wondering about the balance situation. And I know this would be a cabinet decision, but whether we should still be aiming for 2030 in our financial situation. What is the balance? Can we still do it? Should we still aim for this date? You know, you've talked about the viability of some of the buildings that we've got anyway. So some of it's going to be an uphill struggle. Some of the situation with, I know we've had grants for parking bays and so on, EV parking bays, but they're not being used at the moment. So have we been doing this in the right timing? But I'm thinking of the financial viability of it all versus the government wanting us to do it, but can we not just go a little nearer to the 2050 date that the country is doing?
Yeah, I think you have to have a target, and if you stretch yourself on your target, there's no harm in doing that, as long as there are controls in terms of proposals and chunks of that target being brought forward, which there are. So in terms of investment, there's a limited amount of budget set aside in the council's climate reserve from the initial injection into that. That's relatively modest in terms. Additional investment outside of that would have to be found and would have to be agreed. But I think you have to challenge and have this target. And you missed out my previous answer to that. But in addition to my previous answer, I'd probably say there's different views. I think if we had a classroom of sixth formers or high school pupils here now, and we were talking about investing in reducing down carbon emissions, trying to make things more positive, moderate and lead by our example that we're setting there, we'd get a different set of answers back around what is economically viable and what isn't economically viable when weighing up their priorities versus what might be some priorities here as well, really. So I think it's trying to get that into perspective, and I think definitely I don't think there's any harm with stretching ourselves in terms of a target as well, but I think it's going to be challenging for the entire public sector to meet that target.
Thank you. But my concern is the viability when we are of doing this, when the council is going through financial difficulties in providing its core, the core things that we have to deliver. What is your opinion, one versus the other, if you see what I mean? Can we afford to do it?
I think whether we can afford to do it or not will be brought forward on a case-by-case basis. There's a relatively small amount left in the climate reserve to answer a huge amount of aspiration and a huge amount of actions that exist on this carbon reduction management plan. But that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't have those actions, those aspirations, and haven't worked it out. We just need to work out how we're going to pay for it all if we do all of that, and the time frame that that's over, and do it in the most sensible way so that it wouldn't unnecessarily cost us money. And we know the governments and successive governments have continued to offer up funding for that purpose as well. So I think we need to be aspirational, but it's not without challenges.
May I just ask a supplementary? Thank you. So in your opinion, should we be setting priorities in this area?
Yeah, we have
Or
set.
are you?
Yes. Sorry, hello, councillor. We have set priorities. So, in that plan, you'll probably be able to see the years that we've set those priorities. Just following on from what Mark said, there is funding becoming available, and obviously we will look and apply for that funding where it's appropriate. I think it is important to be aspirational, but also to be realistic, as you said. And by having those actions, it does mean that we are showing that we have the intent, if that helps.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my questions. I too am interested in the leisure centres because earlier in the report you say about investing in changes depends on the age of the property. Do we have any idea what years we've got left on the leisure centres?
I know that they are doing stock condition reports at the moment on all of our leisure centres. So, yeah, you know, some of them have got more longevity than others. And yeah, you know, that's something that we'll have to weigh up, whether or not it's worth spending all of that money on decarbonising them if it's just not financially feasible. And the other thing is, you know, the match funding element, you know, whether or not that's, and the criteria within the match funding is so stringent as well. And if we want to replace things like gas boilers with air source heat pumps, they have to be 10 years old or more. So, and that's the problem that we've got with our leisure centres at the moment. They're not 10 years old.
So when would we be seeing some decisions about that?
Well, I'm obviously waiting on assets to provide that data, so that it's happening at the moment. So those reports. So yeah.
I think it's probably worth just mentioning as well, just supplementary to that, explaining from a governance and a direction point of view, we collect and pull as a climate team. We collect and pull together the information from across the whole of the council, but the choices and decisions in relation to an individual asset or an individual area, like how it replaces its vehicles, or a policy on terms of how we shift staff from doing miles in cars to public transport. All of those decisions ultimately they're made from outside of the climate team. The climate team's really to kind of try and set the direction, raise the issues, track the progress that's being made, but it's incumbent on everyone across the council in all of the departments and all of the areas to push their own areas as well.
Thank you. My second question is around the use of cars by staff and councillors. And I'm sure I'm on the top of the list for the councillors in Babergh for the amount of travel I do. Can you sort of explain how we're going to, because I mean that's a lot of energy and a lot of petrol and all of that. What options should we be considering as council? We can't sort of commit for officers, but for councillors, what options are there available? Because to Shotley Peninsula, there's neither a bus nor a train, so it means I have to get in my car. But I am aware that the high mileage by everybody is a problem. So perhaps you could help me with that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I think where possible, people can lease an EV through the council. There are EV pool cars, but for somebody like you, Mary, you have to get somewhere to get that EV. And I just think that people have to be realistic about what they do, and not make everybody feel awful about what they can't do. But where possible, obviously the council offers hybrid meetings, which is excellent, and that means that people don't have to then use their cars to travel. But for staff, there is an EV salary sacrifice scheme that's been introduced this year as well, which is expensive, but there are options. We do have things like schemes where people can block buy train tickets, for example, but and bus tickets. So there are things in place, and if anybody's got any questions about that, obviously sustainable travel sits within climate change as well, and Catherine's always happy to help and to advise anybody. But with public transport as well, we're trying our best to apply for funding and get funding for our districts.
Well, I think on Shotley would welcome a bus for anything, never mind. We have a very poor bus service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of observations and perhaps a question. It's great to see the Cabinet member leading by example when it comes to sustainable transport on her electric cycle. So I think that's always a point worthy of mention. Eloquently, in the conclusions and next steps on page 55, second and third paragraph, I thought the way that that's been put forward answers quite a few of our concerns today, in so much as the collaborative approach across the whole council to carbon management, which I think is a really important point, which sort of talks to things like, for example, like planning and various other things, but also the sustainable transport link that Catherine's dealing with. And I know we've got the Copdock Capel project coming up, which again talks to the points we've made over getting better cycle transport. Mary probably needs something better on the Shotley Peninsula, but that's probably not in the foreseeable future. But overall, just one more point really, which was a question regarding long-term viability and affordability. Do you think that is our aim within 5 years, or are we now talking potentially a little longer?
As I said in my introduction, one of the biggest challenges is funding. If we get the funding, then there is a much, much better chance of you being able to achieve it. If you think about housing, for example, we got funding to do 100 houses, retrofit 100 houses between Babergh and Mid-Suffolk, so 50 each. But I think in Babergh alone, we've got 3,000 units. So that's going to take quite a number of years to get there if that funding stays at that level, we need that funding. That is absolutely critical. I mean, there's a small chink of light in that the stuff that Sarah does around changing behaviour and education bears fruit. I think someone said something about, catch a child young and educate them in the way you want them to go, you will achieve that objective. So, there's quite a lot of education going on around with youngsters about being recycling, planting things, and that will bear fruit as the years go on. The Green Skills School Summit that Sarah's doing, that's for years 8 and 9, but that kind of education and behaviour change is slow to, show benefit, but it does show benefit in the end. And unfortunately, that's the longer term stuff, which is harder to quantify. And let's be honest, most people don't particularly think long term. So that's one of our areas of hope, I think, and doesn't require huge funding. But the main pieces that do need funding, the housing and the leisure centres, the sustainable travel, we're not going to achieve much without funding. So every decision we make, it's always, should we do this now? Is it sensible to do this? Is there enough lifetime left? What benefit will it give us? Will it have enduring benefit? So you make the best decision on this as you can at the time, and incorporate that into the longer term plans.
Thank you. And apologies again if you have already covered this, just tell me and we can leave it. I represent Hadley, and there have been some very big housing estates built in our town. And one of the things I asked the developers when we were involved in the development when councils were involved in the development of these estates was about installing EV charging points for the properties and other situations that might help climate change. Of course, that costs them money, and they weren't keen to do it. Well, and they haven't done it, as far as I understand. Is there anything, I couldn't see anything, I was looking for it on the sheets that you provided. I couldn't see anything that seemed to say to builders or developers, this is the standard that you have to provide in the future. Is there anything going to be done in relation to that, do you know, please?
There is the Future Home Standard coming in next year, which I think is a lot more stringent on the more sustainable measures that can be taken. You'd have to look at it because I can't remember the detail. You're completely right. Developers will not do anything that will cost them money unless it's mandatory. We need that in there. But they would then appeal. If it's not mandatory, if you think about what's in the MPPF is at the top, then I guess you've got the county council, then you've got the district council plans, and then you've got neighbourhood plans. So there's a hierarchy there. Unless it's in the NPPF, it doesn't have much legal weight. You could put something in the district plan, but unless it's backed up by legislation, developers will simply appeal and say, look, we don't have to do this. I think you have to be quite, it would be great if at planning committee more people did pipe up, because I always pipe up about PV panels, and so to the extent people are probably bored with it. But, they simply won't put it in unless there are measures. You could ask, but they would have to agree to putting it in, and then it would have to be captured as a condition and probably in the Section 106 agreement. But you're relying on the developers saying yes. And I think the only time I've ever got a PV panel in was the car processing plant out somewhere in the country. I can't remember where it was. They were building sheds so they could crush cars and redo metal or whatever. But that one, I did ask, and they said yes. So a condition went in for PV panels on the roofs of the new buildings they were putting in. But, you know, it's not much of a cost to them. But they did it. But you have to get developers' agreement to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
On page 53, where we've got the sources of Babergh solar generation, it's clear from here that it says 77% of our solar generation comes from social housing, our social housing stock, which has got most of it does have solar panels. I appreciate that it doesn't contribute to our net zero trajectory because of the way it's all figured out. But I am concerned, Sarah will know this, I've spoken to her before. The solar panels on our social housing are not maintained properly. They haven't been cleaned. I know the ones on my old house were 15 years old, they were never cleaned. And if this is the case throughout the council, could we not please look at a maintenance project for our solar panels? Because obviously, while that's not going to affect the council's net zero trajectory, it affects climate change. And obviously we want that the measures we do have in place, we want them to be as efficient as possible. And also battery storage, we don't have battery storage. So I know we've spoken about this before and it's really a housing issue, but I'm hoping that the climate change team can work with housing to try and speed that up a little bit, because it's a relatively cheap way of maximising our potential solar. And also, sorry, just to add to that, with the leisure centres, which is the next highest solar generators, are we making sure that they are maintained as they should be to maximise their effect?
Thank you, Councillor Hendry. Yes, I have passed on your issues that you talked to me about to your housing team, and one of my team is working with the housing team to try and make sure that that's done. So okay. I can let you know. I think I did message you to let you know that I'd spoken to somebody. In terms of the leisure centres, we've got operation and maintenance in place, and we've actually carried out what do you call them, drone surveys to make sure that they were working correctly. But as you know, there were issues with the roof, so yes. But they are generating, and we do have data now in place, and data that we're collecting and capturing. So the hope is that as the data becomes more robust, as the data collection and the smart metering will start taking place, that we'll have better data and hopefully bringing down that trajectory and bringing down the actual figures that we've got. So, but yeah, you're right, and I have passed on your queries, so hopefully I can give you an answer.
I'm sorry if I missed your message, Sarah, but yeah, thank you.
We've now come to we've ended our question time. We now come to the period of debate. Have we got any councillor that would like to open the debate? Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Chair. To Councillor Riley's point earlier about us effectively being a very small fish in a big pond, and what's the point of doing all this work, all this great work and hard work, when you've got the likes of India and the US, and we'll make no difference whatsoever, so it's no point doing it. And it's a common argument that people come up with, but I always see it as, try to use an analogy of your house. Now, if your neighbours are not doing anything to make your village better, or your parish council are not doing anything to make your parish any better, or even your county district, it doesn't mean you wouldn't do your best to make your house as livable and as nice as you want it to be. I mean, you'd still invest in your house, and even if no one else is doing anything outside. And it's very much, it seems the same to me. You know, we we're not going to have a big effect on what we do, but we can have an effect. All this hard work that our officers and our teams are doing can have an effect on the lives of our residents and on our ambitions. There may not be enough money to do everything we want to do. The targets, we may not meet the targets, but as Mark was saying earlier, you need to set the targets and have the ambitions. Otherwise, if we set the target to 2050, why not set it to 2070 or even to 2100? Because then we might get there. But if you set your targets too far and your ambitions too far away, you're never going to meet them. So, yes, we need still to try to get to 2030, even if we don't have enough money or enough resources to get there in the end. We need to get there. So yeah, I mean, it's the work we're doing is great, and the report is brilliant. It's great to have all these wonderful actions in the plan, and hopefully we will continue to do that way.
Any more comments? Councillor Wyman.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly concur with Councillor Jameson's points. You have to look at it as though it's just like a jigsaw piece in a big picture. It means not a great deal in isolation, but within the overall picture, we are making a difference, and that's the really key point. We have to make a difference. I was pleased to hear from the director that we are integrating our plans with other areas in the department, and that's quite nicely set out in the conclusions and the next steps forward, because land use in the district, in a rural district like ours, is really important, and we need to be sure, certainly when it comes to planning, that we put our developments in the right places, and when we do so, we do it in the most focused way, but also supportive of our residents. But also we need to also consider the actual developments and where they go in and how it all works. So, you know, overall, I'm delighted really to see what progress we have made, and, you know, long may it continue. Thank you.
Wyman. Councillor Grant.
Thank you. Yes, I'm pleased with what we've done so far. I was pleased to hear in the question session that I was here for that priorities are being set, because I think in this time when we are facing financial difficulties as a council, I think we need to examine where the climate change aspect comes in our set of priorities, because we've got certain obligations that we have to make to our residents, and I think that has to come first before the climate change issue. And if we slip behind a little bit in the year that we reach our goals, so be it, because I think in this time when we are fighting to stay above water, we might have to re-examine a little bit where our priorities should lie. You know, keeping someone's roof above their head type thing, emergency situations, as opposed to the general climate emergency. So I think if we slip a few years behind, I don't think we should beat ourselves up too badly, because I think if we get lots of financial help from central government, that will be fine, because then that will pay for our climate change obligations. But if it comes out of our own pocket, I think we should question whether the priorities now should be the same as they were a few years ago when we weren't in such a financial constraint. I know that's not what everyone's going to agree with, but I think it's something we should re-look at, because times have changed a bit. So, you know, there's a sort of what we'd like to do and what we might not be able to do what we would like to do now, unfortunately. So think, because of other priorities, there's always a conflict of priorities, isn't there? But I think there are essential things that we have to do to keep things running for our district. And the climate emergency, we might have to stretch out a little bit to maybe we might not meet our original goals. We'd have to stretch them to a later year or later years to yes, hopefully get there. But when we're under such financial constraints, that might be where we have to let things go a little bit, in my opinion.
Well, I do understand where Councillor Grandin is coming from with that, and obviously we have to put the needs of our residents first. And I think there's going to be some situations in the not too distant future where that is going to be something that we have to look at. But I don't think we should change our ambition. I think our ambition needs to remain as it is now. I think to change that would be crazy. But obviously, if we keep our ambition the way it is, then we can deal with things as and when they come up. Anything might change between now and then. But I think it's really important that we keep, as you say, we shouldn't be too bad on ourselves if we can't. But each decision has to be made on a case-by-case basis. But we have to keep that net zero commitment at the forefront of any decisions we make, while also weighing it up against the financial constraints that we've got.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I have trouble with this. Because I actually think the 2030 zero target is not achievable. Page 51 indicates that we've got to, over the next couple of years, we've got to reduce our CO2 emissions by over 9% a year, whereas our average, and indeed in 23-24, we were only achieving 4.7%. So we've got to gallop twice as fast to reach this target. And I actually regard the target as an aspiration, because sooner or later, reality is going to hit us in the face that we can't afford this. And my own view is actually we shouldn't afford it. But, there we are. It's not going to work. And that's what I find trouble with this paper is it's aspirational. It's not ambitious. It's lots of here will be unachievable. And it's improperly costed. When things are costed, they're not there anyway. So that's all I got to say. I don't support the paper. Full stop.
Right, any more comments? Well, I think as a committee we have a responsibility within this. And so I think I've got to say the ambition is good, the objectives are good, but I think it's worth the overview and scrutiny committee keeping it regularly under review with reports back to us so that we can have the discussion. And we've got to aim for what is the best thing for our district. That's important, and for our residents. So I think the paper has given us a lot of information, and so I think we ought to go to some recommendations. So we've got the recommendations as on page 5, which is 3.1 and 3.2. Now, Alicia, do you think, having listened to the committee, are there anything, or our members, is there anything members would like to add as a recommendation? Councillor Grandin.
We did it properly, to be honest. But perhaps you could guide, if you wouldn't mind, please. I would like to talk about the viability so that, you know, we keep the finances in mind and look at viability and balance and that kind of thing. Could you kindly help formulate a recommendation that... But bearing in, you know, with those words in mind, please.
Thank you, Councillor Grandin. Is that the financial viability of reaching the 2030 target?
Yes.
Is that in particular? Okay.
Yes. And then, you know, and all the way along having a sort of balance of the financial balance versus the climate change desires, so that we can come, you know, get there, but with our heads still above water.
Yes, Chairman. A quick question to the Director. Is there a factor mark that equates to cost against carbon saved? So is there some kind of weighting factor that we could bring into the sort of our sort of plans in a way, the cost per tonne of carbon saved, or something which would give a sort of a high level lead on sort of cost prioritisation, which might work?
Well, two things really, I suppose. One, 6.3 says the council has an established climate reserve with a balance of 138,964. That reserve has actually decreased from that point. That was as of 1st of April 2024. So the reserve at the moment is circa £60,000 after spending on that reserve during the course of the year so far, year to date. So it's around about that, yeah. So the figure that you're talking about as the established climate reserve is relatively modest from that point of view. Therefore, portfolio holder, cabinet would be needing to bring back and look for other proposals with council to increase that reserve or to do that if the money was available there to do that. So I think the concern that money may get spent that you know, or run out of control there probably isn't the case there as a real concern, I would say. Although I totally understand also the challenge of trying to look at what is value for money and what isn't. So if we went away as officers and we could get the finance resource in, or after the budget we looked at this and we looked exactly and said to you, we've spent £1 million on climate, on all these measures so far, and it has saved X amount of carbon. I think the question is, what do you do with that bit of information when you have it? And I'm not sure there is a metric which you can compare local authority to local authority as to whether that is value for money or not. So you would still be faced at that particular point of time in what would tell you about, does that equal good use of money? Doesn't that equal good use of money? Is that value for money or not? So in terms of committing to the extra work to do that, I would caution some thought against what are you going to do with that bit of information when you get it, and what would you compare it against to make that decision or not as to whether it's there, because I'm not aware that in what we do that index exists.
Maybe we could ask other councils if they do similar, some kind of quantification on climate change benefit.
Sorry, Councillor Davis, we didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking about the finance piece. There may be other councils that already have something in place where they actually quantify, well, firstly how much they spent, but then also what the projected benefit would be and the costs they've actually saved by doing this. So we could make some inquiries and find out. If not, it would come back to asking the finance team if we can have some data from them, which would have a bit of an overhead.
You know, the practicalities of this. Do we, Alicia, do we request, I'm trying to think, say an information bulletin in 6 months' time, and we could decide what are the standards that we're looking for, that and how we've moved on or achieved it, or would that be? Do you think that would be helpful to have this committee have an information bulletin from your team, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is we're reporting on this report that we've brought forward is the greenhouse gas emissions report, because the timing, it was such that it allowed you to examine that report, which hasn't happened in previous years. But what we've inevitably strayed into is what's been the cost of achieving those emission savings, and that happening as well. And I think the two can exist separately in terms of your recommendations, in terms of what recommendations you might have on changes to the report. But if you're interested in asking more information about what have the cost of achieving those emission changes to date been, then I said we're happy to make a commitment to bring that back. It's just, I'm saying, being practical from a timing point of view, I can't reasonably go in and ask our finance team to try and pull them off budget work in order to do base budgeting going back since the climate emergency was declared, to start piecing together the various costs in there at this particular stage. But we can certainly go back and do that once the budget work's done.
Well, I was thinking an information bulletin is pretty brief, and it would keep the committee updated, and Alicia and your team perhaps could decide what is in that information bulletin. Does that sound okay to the committee? So we have an update. The other thing, Councillor Hendry, I was interested a bit about the maintenance of the solar panels. I think we need to make that a recommendation. The cleaning of is it the actual cleaning of them?
It's the cleaning and maintenance of the residential.
Yeah, so it's the maintenance and cleaning of the solar panels in housing, and we understand leisure centres as well. Yes? Are you happy to? Councillor Jamieson.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I was just going to say, in terms of the report, is it possible to have a breakdown of the actual individual leisure centres, so you can see the cost of Kingfisher against Hadley, against even Mid Suffolk, and drill down more into what each leisure centre energy costs are?
I think summarising, if we could bring back an information bulletin which breaks down the expenditure in each of these areas of interventions, together with the emissions that have been saved in those areas as well, then that would help to satisfy understanding the cost versus emission saving. And if we can get that answer separately also for Councillor Hendry on the cleaning of the cleaning of the PV panels on our housing, on our own internal housing stock. We are aware as a team that the housing team have put in place a new O&M contract recently, and we're under the understanding that does include cleaning the panels, but we're not disputing the fact that previously that may or may not have happened, or happened on an intermittent basis.
Thank you. Any more recommendations from anybody? Councillor Wyman, were you going to suggest something?
On a slightly wider point, Chairman, I was just thinking, obviously we're in a transition phase within the housing maintenance areas, moving away from contractors to our own staff, etc. Presumably there's going to be an improved trajectory in the way we work, more efficient processes, etc. Is that likely to see a reduction in our overall sort of carbon footprint in terms of what we do, i.e. being more efficient, in also speaking to Councillor Hendry's point on things like cleaning the solar panels and such like?
Well, obviously those solar PV that are roof mounted in our social housing will be more efficient, but we don't currently use that in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions report because we can't control what our residents are doing in terms of how they're heating their homes and so on, and how much they're using them. But
so two other areas to that as well. In terms of the energy efficiency of the housing maintenance team and how they carry out their repairs and compliance checks, then two initiatives we're aware of that are underway at the moment are bringing in new mobile working software and job scheduling, which will help to reduce down the amount of wasted travel time from mobile repairs operatives and compliance checking and how that occurs and happens. And over the last couple of months, 2 or 3 months, the new materials contract has come on board as well. And that materials contract will be a change in that stock won't be delivered and need to be delivered to central stores where staff will have to return to pick it up for each day's work, and there'll be a system of drop boxes, direct deliveries and local merchants that can be collected from, and again that should help to reduce down the amount of unnecessary travelling time involved in that part of the operation as well.
Thanks, Mark. That was my point. Thanks.
Are we finished with recommendations? Anybody want to add to that? So I'm going to ask our lead officer to read out what she has already got, and we can see whether we agree with it or not.
Thank you, Chair. Before I read out all the recommendations, if I could, about the recommendation to do with bringing back an information bulletin or a further report, could we discuss whether we want that to be a rolling item or a standalone item, in which case it would be best to clarify a date by which we want to see that brought back by? So I'm mainly talking, do we want 6 monthly updates, annual updates, or are we happy to just have one report? I'll leave that to a committee to discuss.
Can I just clarify with Mark? Did you see this sort of scrutiny coming on an annual basis? On a regular basis, annually, sorry.
I think the frequency of how often Overview and Scrutiny want to scrutinise different areas of the council is sort of a matter for chairs and a matter for Overview and Scrutiny to decide in terms of checking the work programme. But from the recommendations and what you're suggesting there, I envisaged that we'd bring back an information bulletin to answer those questions around expenditure to date and carbon reductions achieved through that, so that you could make a more informed assessment of the interventions that have taken place so far, and whether you felt that they were effective or created sort of value for money from that point of view. And I would suggest that, when we bring that bulletin back, realistically I wouldn't expect we'd bring that back before the new year unless we can get the access to the information that we actually need to do that. I would then suggest have a look at that, and does that answer that information? Do you then see this coming back annually with the greenhouse gas emissions report being a good time when that's published? Aspirationally, we'd like to get this report out earlier next year again. This year we're getting it out earlier than we did the year before, and that report was earlier than the year before that. We'd like to get that report so that it's coming out a couple of months after the end of the council year. We are ahead of many other councils, including a number in Suffolk, in terms of the dates that we do publish our report, but hopefully we'll get much more close to the end of the year.
I was just thinking that if we have it on an annual basis, obviously I'm hoping that would be less work for the officers, because if they're aware of that as they're going through and costing things, it can always be in the back of their mind that each project we do, they will be costing it as they go along. So I would hope that it'd be nice to get that culture embedded in what they're doing anyway, so that we can always have an answer about how, as an annual report, certainly.
So if I'm understanding Mark correctly, he's saying you'll bring back a bulletin for this report, and then annually with the report every year. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm saying we bring back the information bulletin, but it's really up to the committee to set how frequently it would like to see this. Aspirationally, we want to start bringing forward the timeline of when we produce our information in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions report, so that we bringing this report forward now in December in reality, well, that's reporting on the year that finished at the end of March. So we'd like to get that sooner. And we feel we can do that. The other thing we'd like to do going forward, we're not quite there yet, but we'd like to start producing information on emissions in our quarterly reporting that's brought forward to council as well, so that you start to see performance against that rather than waiting till the end of the year as well. So hopefully it'll probably be working 1 quarter behind, but we should be able to start bringing that forward as well.
So, to reiterate what Mark said, it is the committee's choice. So we've requested the extra information on the costings of finances as well as the individual profiles on leisure centres. So it's whether the committee is satisfied to wait for this to come back at the next annual report, or if you want it to be in an individual information bulletin, and I'm happy to be guided by members.
Well, it's up to the committee.
Yes, Chair. I mean, I'm just thinking of Councillor Riley's point over costs, etc. And I think the 6-month bulletin, based on what Mark said, would work, and then with the annual review would work perfectly well.
I've got to say that's why I actually introduced the idea of an information bulletin, because the team are busy. We've got to make sure that they have the time to do all these things. And I thought an information bulletin actually allows them the freedom to then produce a report at some point, and we can actually just note the information bulletin and see what you've achieved. How does that sound? Okay. The team, if we're going to give Alicia time to do the recommendations, you're more than welcome to stay, but if you want to go, please go, because I'm sure you've all got lots to do. And I want to say, Mark, thank you so much for your team and the hard work that they've put in. I know, yes, we just are grateful that we've been able to have a discussion with it, because some of it's a bit nebulous, isn't it? But thank you very much, and we're going to take a 5-minute break. Welcome back, committee. I'm going to ask our lead officer to read out the recommendations that she has put together on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, I have 5 recommendations for us to consider. Number 1 is that Babergh Overview and Scrutiny notes the report and supports the work undertaken by the climate change team so far to reach the Council's net zero targets. Recommendation 2, that the climate change team, in collaboration with the Housing Department, explore setting up a maintenance scheme for solar panels on the Council's social housing stock and leisure centres. Recommendation 3, that officers present an information bulletin to the Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee in May 2025 on the financial costings and savings of the work undertaken to reach the Council's climate targets. Recommendation 4, that officers present update reports on the greenhouse gas reduction and the progress of the carbon reduction management plan to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on an annual basis. And recommendation 5, that the Cabinet, alongside officers, re-examine the financial viability of reaching the Council's target of net zero by 2030, with due consideration being given to Babergh's current financial situation. Thank you, Chair.
What do you think? Councillor Riley.
So recommendation 3, that officers present an information bulletin to the Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee in May 2025 on the financial costings and savings of the work undertaken to reach the Council's climate targets. Thank you.
Could we have this recommendation, which we will vote on in a moment? Could you email it to us, please?
Would you like me to do that now?
Before we vote? No. Post the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will circulate all the recommendations straight after the meeting. Thank you.
Could the governance officer read the PV one again, please?
Of course. So that is recommendation 2, that the climate change team, in collaboration with the Housing Department, explore setting up a maintenance scheme for solar panels on the Council's social housing stock and leisure centres. Councillor Jameson.
Sorry if I missed it, but was there going to be a breakdown of the leisure centres against each other?
Yes. So would you like that breakdown of the leisure centres to come as part of the information bulletin or the annual report?
No, I think
In review.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Yeah, I can add that in.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, could you read out number 5 again, please?
Of course, that's fine. That the Cabinet, alongside officers, re-examine the financial viability of reaching the Council's target of net zero emissions by 2030, with due consideration being given to Babergh's current financial situation.
That was in synchronised waving. Councillor Grandon, and can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hendry. Thank you. And we're now going to go on the mod.gov for the voting.
No worries. Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress on mod.gov. Councillor Ridey? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. That is 6 votes for, so that's unanimous.
Now we go on to item 7 on our agenda. It seems a long time since we started the discussion, really, of the meeting, doesn't it? So, forthcoming decisions list. Have any members got any comments on the forthcoming decisions list? Councillor Riley.
We're currently on the forthcoming decision list item.
Item 7, Councillor Riley. Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think last time we looked at one of these meetings, we agreed as a committee that we should have a report or an investigation into the £500,000 loss on money market investments sustained by this council. And not only is no information coming forward, but it's not here. We also asked to look at the cost of communications and PR, the communications team and the PR team for the council. And again, that's not here. And we also asked for a third one, was what was the cost of the climate change office, for which is not here. So we have a situation where, as a committee, we have asked for 3 things, and 3 things are not here. And the most important thing, which is not here, is the £500,000 loss.
Councillor Riley, but never mind. Let's just tie up the item 7, which was the forthcoming decisions list. Everybody happy with that? Any comments at all about that list? No. Right, now we'll go on to item 8, which is the overview and scrutiny work plan. And your items, you've got quite a lot of items there, Councillor Riley.
But not the 3 that we specifically asked for.
When did Councillor Riley ask for them?
So, as Councillor Riley accurately says, he asked for these items to go on the work plan at the last overview and scrutiny committee meeting. As much as I would like it to be easy, it's not easy for me to get an item on the work plan straight away, immediately after. I'm quite happy that we now today have agreed that a paper on climate change costs will be coming in May 25 as part of our information bulletin, so hopefully that satisfies, but we'll obviously be able to have discussion as a committee before that item to make sure that the information that you particularly want to see is included in that paper, so there'll be opportunity for you to shape that going forward. So hopefully that's all okay. If you want to comment, please feel free.
When do we think we'll have that opportunity? So I'll get my diary right.
In May 25 as part of the information bulletin that we just, as part of a report that we just discussed. So that will be dealt with then. In terms of cost of communication, would you like that to be its own independent item, or would you like that to be captured in our upcoming budget reports?
Yes, please.
Is that a yes to it being in the budgets?
The reason is,
Yeah.
I bring up these 2 items because it gives us an opportunity to influence the budget. Whereas when we were given the draft budget in May, actually May's already too late, we lose the time that we need to consider and to influence. This is why I thought, these figures should be quite easy to get from the spreadsheets. Despite the accounts department working 24/7 as hard as they can, according to Councillor Sorwin, we should be able to pull these figures out and then say to ourselves, we're happy that we're spending enough, we're happy that we're not spending enough, we're spending too much. So if we're going to influence the budget, we should see these figures earlier.
Okay. Right, Councillor Riley, what I'm going to suggest, because I need to get my head around what Councillor Riley was the chair and the vice chair, and Alicia, we have got to look at our programme. So, Councillor Riley, if you'd like to send me an email as chair with the items that you wish to be discussed and reviewed, then I will sit with Councillor Wyman and Alicia and we'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Of course. So the most that we could probably do about that, because it's a very specific thing that we want to look at, the most it could come as is probably an information bulletin. Now, I would suggest that this also maybe gets picked up in budget discussions next month. But I can be steered by yourself in the committee. I'm conscious that that's been brought up in cabinet meetings, and it's also been brought up in the most recent audit and standards meeting as well. It's the UBS fund closure, I think.
That was nothing to do with the council. It was the fund actually closed itself.
If I may.
Of course.
That has already come up in Cabinet, which is how I picked it up first time. And when we asked questions of what it was about, we were told it was an unexpected event. Yes. And when we tried to dig down and drill down to what made it such an unexpected event, we got no answer. And as I've said before, had the dinosaurs been awake and had the ability, they would have known that the asteroids were on their way. And here we have £500,000 loss, which means council tax, which means jobs, if we're unlucky. And I'd really like to know why. The impression I get is that someone somewhere should have known, but was asleep at the wheel. And I think waiting until May is far too late. This is a very important thing. We've lost £500,000 for crying out loud. And to be told it was unexpected, I don't buy. I don't even know the name of the fund. I can't even research the name of the fund. All we know it was a UBS fund.
Right, Councillor Riley, I'm a member of the Joint Audit and Standards Committee, and that was answered by the Section 151 officer, the reason that was closed. What I suggest to reassure Councillor Riley, Alicia, could you, if everybody's agreed, could you write to Melissa and ask the question, which we can then relay back to the committee? Because it was nothing to do with the district at all. It was out of their hands. The fund closed itself. Councillor Wyman, you were going to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Riley's quite right to raise it because there's a significant amount of finance which seems to have sort of almost disappeared. I think the issue was that UBS were taken over by Credit Suisse, and the actual fund then ceased to exist, so it was aggregated into another fund. I think the real question, or the real answer is that there will be a black and white response to this, which Councillor Riley has every right to hear, which I think is available to us through either yourself or through the governance officer as a bulletin or whatever.
But I think we could raise it as a committee on behalf of Councillor Riley to Melissa, to the Section 151 officer, and get a clear answer on that. Okay?
Yes, come on, please, yes.
Yeah. All right, Alicia.
Yeah. So as the chair states, what I will do after this meeting is I will email Melissa as the Section 151 officer, as well as Tom Barker, who's our Chief Operating Officer, to see if we can get some information on that. Hopefully we can distribute it to the committee through just through email, and then if more questions are raised, then we can discuss it in that public setting. Just as a point of clarification, the budgets are coming in December. I don't know if I accidentally confused you. It's the climate change reports that are coming in May. So the budgets we're discussing in a couple of weeks at overview and scrutiny. So if based on the written answer about the UBS fund, you actually want that raised in public session, we will be able to do it in December, if that satisfies.
We have part of the information
Mhm.
by then.
Yep.
I get concerned. We raise questions and we ask information and we get fobbed off. To a point, actually, they're being ignored.
Yeah, and that.
And this is not satisfactory to us, not satisfactory to my councillors or to myself. So, are we going to get some information before December, so we come to our December meeting fully prepared?
I will do my best, Councillor Riley, to make sure that you have information ready for you ahead of December, so you can ask those questions
So
if necessary.
once you've got the information, then you can ask the question in December. Yes? But I think we've got to get the facts from the section 151 officer. Okay? Councillor Wyman.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to reassure Councillor Riley that both the Chair and the Vice Chair, myself, do take some time, and we are very fastidious when it comes to making financial questions or trying to get responses from members, whether it be cabinet members or whatever. And we are constantly looking at the scope of the subjects we should look at, one of which will no doubt be coming to within the scope of the committee fairly shortly. But we do go to great endeavours to make sure that we get financial transparency, and all those hard questions are asked, even though sometimes they may be in private.
Plan. Councillor Grandin.
Thank you. I can't remember if we discussed Corks Lane, and if we did, what did we say about that? I can't see it on the list.
So Councillor Grandin was asking about Corks Lane. So, it was recently agreed at the Babergh Cabinet meeting that Overview and Scrutiny would do a review into the Corks Lane project when the project is completed. That is going to be 26-27. I'm a bit conscious that we can't get into the details too much in open session because it's a confidential issue. So we'll probably leave it at that. So we have that date set in stone at the moment, and then conversations are being had with myself, the chair, the vice chair, about what we can potentially do in the meantime.
What is the definition of completed?
Well, it's about the set.
Everybody dies.
You would have to ask
When the
Emily
building's
Atack about that.
finished, or is
Yes.
it when they've all sold, or you know?
Yeah, I'm not too sure how the project gets classified as completed. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about the project to be able to advise you in this setting, but I would recommend getting in contact with Emily Atack if you have questions.
Can I just reassure members that this is a subject that we have under review, the Vice Chair and I, and we've accepted what the Cabinet have said so far in response. Can I just explain to people why Overview and Scrutiny became the target, if you like, for the discussion? It was raised, I'm on the Joint Audit and Standards Committee, and it was raised by a committee member on JASC with a recommendation to go to Overview and Scrutiny for review. So that's how Overview and Scrutiny were in the loop in terms of looking at the Corks Lane expenditure and the Corks Lane project.
Yes, shouldn't just be expenditure, should be management.
So, but in fact, there has been, we are working, Councillor Wyman and I are working really hard that we make sure that everybody's questions and concerns are met. But that is not, I've got to say, it is not suitable at the moment for that review.
I thought that might be the case. Can I request that Chair and Vice Chair find out when, you know, what they consider completed to be? You know, what is a definition of that, please?
Councillor Grandon, I quite agree with you. And those are some of the questions that, believe you me, we're working really hard, aren't we, Councillor Wyman, to satisfy everybody's concerns.
Just to satisfy all the members of the committee, there are elements of significant commercial confidentiality where we could, by inference questions asked in a public session like this, create a real problem, a legal problem, for potential recoveries of money from professional negligence, etc. So it would be sensible to take these questions at a different time.
At the council meeting, both Councillor Ward and Councillor Saw said this would be an independent inquiry away from ONS, and that that was reiterated by numerous councillors in the members in the. Is the ONS going to be separate to an independent inquiry? Or?
I think at this time we go with what we've been advised. Sorry.
Sorry for interrupting, Chair. Could we have this conversation after the public session is closed? Because I'm conscious that we're getting into conversations that happened within meetings in closed session, and I don't want any of us to accidentally tip over that line. But we'll have a conversation at the close of the meeting. Thank you.
So we've got the work plan. What about the action tracker? That's item 9.
A big topic and a smaller topic. So is it intentional that there's only, I think there's only one item per meeting? Is that deliberate, or will there be smaller, a subsidiary topic?
Of course.
As well?
Half deliberate, in a sense that when formulating the work plan, I like to make sure that every meeting has at least one thing on it to space out the work that we do over the municipal year. But it's always open for more items to be added on to any meeting if we deem it appropriate and if timetabling works. So just having one item per meeting is a nice way of spacing out our business, so we have had years in the past where we've been quite top heavy with our items, where we've got everything done by this time in a year and then we've had nothing up until May. So it's just a way of spacing it out, but not set in stone. If there's other items to go on there, they can go on there just as easy. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to conclude. Oh, sorry, Councillor Jamieson.
Sorry, I'm just going to go back on the work plan. Sorry about that. At the last council meeting, there was an agreement to debate the governance system in the next year. Could we scrutinise our governance system and possibly even the other governance systems for pros and cons ahead of that meeting?
I would have to take that away and explore if that's feasible for us to do and how we would have input to that within the governance processes of bringing that item to council. So it's not a no, but leave that with me and I'll see if there's any way we can get involved in that. Cool.
Work plan about community-led housing, that is round about almshouses. I've got some concerns around almshouses and the tenants who are our residents, and we need to just review that and see how they're protected. So that's the reason that's there. Right, any more comments? Right, thank you, committee. We can now say the meeting is closed at 4:10.